When I was 17, I was working in Chicago cutting strings off salamis at my family's sausage business. And my brother and I, he was 19, I was in between high school and college. He had already had 2 speeding tickets that summer, but we went to a party in Highland Park. I had never drank before. And we drank, and he was driving and was driving drunk. We went through Kenilworth in Chicago, and police stopped us and arrested him for drunken driving. And I got out of the car and he said, we're arresting you for public drunkenness. And I remember I said, I'm not drunk, Ossifer. I said, and I looked down and I saw my reflection in his shoe right before I threw up on him.
Oh, well, that's a great way to start this conversation.
I learned my lesson.
All right, so John, let's talk about the beginning. First, we'll go into the beginning and then we'll get through everything. What was it like growing up? I mean, was it your father that taught you to be an entrepreneur? What was the beginning of this life?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure anybody gets taught to be an entrepreneur. I don't know if any of you, I'm honored to be in a room of such esteemed entrepreneurs. But I'm sure that when you decided to do something, you became an entrepreneur, and you weren't taught it. And I do speak at a lot of schools, business schools, and I'm not in entrepreneurship, and there are students there that are trying to learn to be an entrepreneur, but I'm not really sure that you can learn it. It's really a personality. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 5. And ordinarily I tell the story about when I was 5, but I don't know. This is a lot of women in this audience, and you're here for women's rights, and you may not like my story when I was 5. Okay, I'll tell it. So when I was 5, I might have been 6. My parents went to art school in Cincinnati, and they went to the art museum, and every Tuesday night they would paint nude models. And after 3 months, they came, the school class was over, they came back, they put all the nude paintings in the attic, and I charged a nickel a piece to my friends to see them. So anyway, I reformed. So I did start in porn, but and I've never had better margins than that. But there's entrepreneurs like myself, which are more rare, that have been doing this since they were young. And more often than not, they're people that are regular people that work for companies and this and that, and see an opportunity and decide to do it. And it's the same entrepreneur, but it's a harder job, because since I've done it since I was little, I never even think about it. It was just natural. I never had fears. I never qualified for a job either. That's a good reason to become an entrepreneur. Most people become an entrepreneur because life circumstances, and they see an opportunity and they have to make a decision to do it. And when you do it and you have families and this and that, it's a harder decision when you have mortgages and et cetera. But I started early, and I've had businesses my entire life. I mean, all through school, we always were selling something, shoveling something. We used to park cars at the parking lot. A friend of mine owned Kenner Toys, my best friend across the street. You probably played with the Easy Bake Oven or Play-Doh. That was part of their company, but they were making squirt guns that shot around the corner. So I'd aim at you and hit the person over here. And we worked there on Saturdays, and we would take these slightly defective ones home and sell them in the neighborhood for 10 cents a piece. I just remember that. But that same friend of mine, they had a parking lot about a mile from the ballpark in Cincinnati, and they had parking lots much closer. But we had a lot of people from West Virginia and Indiana and Kentucky that didn't know the area. And so we would take 4 or 5 of us, and we'd drive up, and we'd all go into this parking lot, and everybody'd follow us in. And then we'd drive out the back and do it again. And we had this full parking lot. Then people realized how far they had to walk for the game. But that's just an example of we're always looking for things to do. And I'll just give you some of the examples. When I was in college, I went to Wisconsin for 2 years. By the way, I'm a 7-year undergrad. I was in pre-med for 7 years. You never want to go to a doctor, spend 7 years in pre-med. Find somebody else. But I went to Wisconsin for 2 years, and while I was there, by the way, I'm quite old. Just for the record, I'll be 80 this year, so I'm.
Wow!
But I say that not so. Not. I haven't needed one, but.
That is so funny.
I say that not so much for you guys to say, wow. It's more that I've got a lot of experience in life, and I have started and been successful with many businesses through my life. I've also had many failures within the businesses. So you learn from as much or more from the failures as you do the successes. Fortunately, all the businesses themselves were successful in the end, but I've dealt with every challenge you could have starting a business. But while I was at Wisconsin, it was at that point, you're all too young, but at that point, women didn't have pierced ears. The only earrings were ones with you screw them on, and they were not very cool, and it wasn't a big deal. But the schools like Berkeley, Wisconsin, and NYU, they were all getting their ears pierced, and the women were then going out and buying a whole bunch of these inexpensive earrings. And after 2 years there, I transferred back home to Cincinnati, the University of Cincinnati. And I figured, well, these schools are doing this, it's gonna affect Cincinnati too, it's gonna spread all over. So I opened up an earring store called the Ear Hole. And, and it used to be a shoe shine parlor, a little tiny thing. And I put black velvet on the walls, and I made an ear out of plywood that hung outside. The earring is actually a toilet float.
Oh my gosh.
But no one knew it. But, I went to New York with my mother, and I didn't know much about earrings, but she came, and we went to all these stores upstairs, and we'd buy these earrings for 19 cents. And they would be monkeys, and they were all the stuff I saw at Wisconsin. There were some studs, but inexpensive earrings is what the market was at that time. They did have solid gold or silver wires, so they weren't unsafe. And then I put them all on the wall. Now, next door to me was a store called Stop and Shop. And I'm telling you this because there's a lesson in it. And the Stop and Shop had a lot of similar earrings that I had. They were a 5 and 10. This was before Walmart and probably before Kmart, probably when Kresge's was around. But it was a 5 and 10. And they had these similar earrings, and they bought them for 19 cents, and they sold them for 38 cents. Nobody bought them. I sold mine for $4.99, and everybody bought them. And there was a lesson there, because a lot of entrepreneurs, especially if you're in a consumer product, tend to say, I'm making it for 20 cents, I'm going to sell it for 40 cents, and or maybe the retailer then will sell it for 60 cents. When the reality is, you have a product and here's the cost. Now I look at what's the best selling price. It may have nothing to do with the cost. It may turn out the cost is too much and I don't do that product. But I always look to the market itself for the right price for it. And there was a perfect example of something I was buying for 19. Everyone was paying $4.99, and nobody would pay 38 cents for the very similar earrings. I sold that store to another college student. Went to Europe, bought an MGB at the factory, bought bell-bottom pants, and traveled all over Europe for 3 months. And having that car was...
How old were you at that point?
I was 12. No. No, I was between sophomore and junior year, so I was probably 20, something like that. 19 or 20.
Okay.
Anyway,
All right.
the purpose of the businesses I started, including the pornography business, was always to become wealthy within the context of my life. So when I sold those paintings for a nickel a piece, I made 30 nickels. Nickels, fudge sickles cost a nickel then. That was my dream product to want. And I was fudge sickle rich. And when I sold my earring store, and maybe I sold it for $8,000, and I was able to spend $3,500 for a brand new MGB convertible, and whatever it was a lot of money for that. Later on, I ended up in Boston, and there's a lot of circumstances how I was there for Vista during the war and everything. But my brother had opened up an antique clothing store in Haight-Ashbury. And it was real hip, and he was a very poor manager, and they blew all the money, but I thought, well, that might be a good idea for Harvard Square. So, and I figured if I could find these clothes, then I can open a store. If I didn't find enough, I'd send them out to my brother. He can buy them from me. Well, I found a big truckload of stuff to start, and I opened up a store in Harvard Square. It was right at the time that Barbra Streisand was wearing antique clothing. And so it took off. And
what year are we in?
let's say it was probably 1967 or 8, something like that. That's why I established my age, so otherwise it would make sense these years. But, and it was so much fun. I mean, and it was, again, the products that I would buy these shawls and fur coats, everything, for 50 cents or $1. And
Where would you go to get these, though?
I'd go all over New England, people's basements, flea markets. Every once in a while, somebody would have a big amount of them from somehow, and I never ran out. But part of making the money was finding it. When I found it, I knew what I could sell it for. It was really finding the inventory. Well, one of the things we did, and this was part of being an entrepreneur, they had a ton of antique petticoats, white petticoats. There were a lot of them. Well, who wanted a petticoat? But it was a hippie time, and so we had a hippie apartment, and we had a great big pot, and we would dye them different colors and sell them as peasant skirts. And we'd sell them as fast as we could dye them. I don't know what happened when they washed them, but I was too young to think about things like that. But I say this because this is part of the entrepreneurial personality. It doesn't mean creative. It's really a person who has whatever it takes to go ahead and do something and go try it. I was asked earlier whether to become an entrepreneur, not become an entrepreneur. And because I started young, I never thought of it. But I think in that regard, the most important thing is actually studying the entire opportunity to see if it's worth going into. Anyway, after the antique clothing, I went to Warwick, New York, to a philosophy, spiritual philosophy group, community. And I was there for 6 or 7 years. And the only way to make a living there was either in the trades or in the arts. And so I went into the trades, and I became a carpenter, a landscaper, a radio record player repairman, a licensed plumber and heating. I really learned. I didn't know about the trades because when I grew up, my father was a doctor, and when something broke, we called somebody, and it was kind of an impossible thing what they were doing. Well, I found out that many things in life before electronics really were mechanical, and mechanical were basically simple things. So I learned a lot, made a good living for that group. I did buy another MG, but and I did that for a bunch of years, and eventually moved on to Cincinnati. When I got married, and I moved back home to Cincinnati, and I worked for a little while in selling real estate in Cincinnati for about 3 months. But when I was a plumber, I knew about these water-saving shower heads. There was shower heads that were developed for the nuclear sub program that only used 2 gallons a minute as opposed to 5 gallons a minute of a regular one, including 2 gallons of hot water rather than. And it was during the energy crisis of the 70s. And most of you are too young for it, but in the 70s, the world looked like it was running out of oil. And so everything changed. The lines at the gas station, everyone was buying kerosene heaters. They were cutting down their trees in their yard and finding out once they burned their trees up that wood cost more than oil. And so I got the idea of starting an energy-saving products company. So I went to Rhode Island, and I met with these 2 drunk guys that own the rights to the shower head in a boat in Rhode Island, and got that product. And we started selling that originally to apartments and universities, and then thought that it would go over at retail. We had no experience in retail, but no one else in that new industry did either. So we learned how to package, and we were mainly selling to companies like Grossman's Lumber. These don't exist anymore, but it was really before Kmart maybe have started then, but True Value Hardware and Ace Hardware, accounts like that. And in a few years, we built a $5 million company, which back then, that was pretty significant to grow out of nothing. And it was before the time that these companies had computers. Kmart and the likes, they didn't have computerized inventory. So a lot of the purchasing and inventory was based on rumor. You know, something would be hot, and a store owner would call a buyer and say, "This is flying off the shelf," and he'd think the whole chain was flying off the shelf. Well, after 3 years of this, I saw that the price of oil that these products were slowing down, and that the price of oil was coming down, and it turned out that this oil shortage was somewhat of possibly a fake. And I knew that this was going to be a problem. At the same time, I was married and I had a little boy, and he used to crawl around the kitchen, but he'd bang his head against the corners of the counters, and and I said, "Boy," it was right when they used to have wooden gates that opened up like accordions. You probably have seen them. They're gates, and they made corrals. They became outlawed at that time because they were dangerous. Kids were getting caught in them. And so I said, why can't I make some kind of a corral that could open up into any shape to fit into this room or any room, and would fold up like a little suitcase and weigh nothing. And so we developed a product, and I didn't know whether to do it or not. And I was at the hardware show with the other stuff, and suddenly the name came to me, Crawl Space. And when I thought of Crawl Space, I called the patent attorney, got that filed right away, and I said, "We're in business." That really, and we built a product that was a delightful product called Crawl Space, and we did something else that no one ever did in the industry. In that industry back then, they'd have brown corrugated boxes to sell playpens and cribs and high chairs, and they didn't have packaging. They were not marketing oriented. So we made a great big box for this, and I said it was very light with a handle, and put a giant photographic label on it. So when you went into the store, there's all these brown boxes in our product, and our product got very hot. And then I had another baby, and another, but the other baby was between 0 and 6 months old. We put the baby on an infant seat or on a blanket on the floor, and in 5 minutes they start crying. So we'd hand them a rattle. Well, at that age, they'd hold it for a few seconds, then drop it. They were too young to do that. And so I said, well, why don't we make a little, like a swing, and hang the toys down over them so that they have a visual effect, and they could play with them. And when they let go, it's still there. So we made what originally was called Rainbow Toy Bars. It's now used by every baby in the world in different forms. And it flew off the shelves at Toys R Us. And what it did is the same babies that would take 5 minutes and they cry could sit there for an hour and a half. It worked. But after not much more than a year and a half of the baby business, we got contacted by Gerber Baby Foods. Gerber was buying infant products. They figured we have the Gerber name, that's the most popular name in babies. So they started buying car seats and strollers, and they bought Century products in Cleveland. Built Right had the umbrella stroller and high chairs and cribs and everything. And they came and they made a deal, and they bought my company. And I used to joke, because I was living in Cincinnati, and the products that I would be with were in Cleveland at Century. And I used to joke that they were paying me 10% for my company and 90% to move to Cleveland. But turned out Cleveland was quite nice. We have a couple Cleveland people here as well. But I ended up selling the company to them, and I was vice president in charge of nothing. And what I did is I developed a bunch of product for them. They had a son-in-law who stopped everything. He was jealous of me, and he would interfere with everything I did. But I developed walkers that were little cars and a lot of good things. But the good news for me was I got to go to Asia. I got to learn how to make products in Asia, and I took advantage of that. And back then we weren't really using China. We were making products in Taiwan and Korea mostly. But I would go over there and a little bit of China. And in fact, I met an agent in China who later became a very important part of my entire career. But after doing that for about a year, I worked for them for about a year. I left to start a toy company. Now, why did I start a toy company? Because everything else I had done, inventions involve need. And you need for babies, you had to have something that feeds them or carries them or, something. Energy, it was how could you save energy? And by the way, when we did the energy business, we invented a whole lot of products. That's when I kind of became an inventor. But I liked the idea of toys because there was no need. Anything could be a toy if it was fun. So I started the toy company, and that led to another one of the greatest learning experiences of my life. And that is that I went out and I bought from an inventor 2 toys. A doll called Blooming Dolls, which was a little flower pot, and you could put your hand in it, it becomes a puppet, and then you fold it under, it becomes a little doll. It was really a cute product. And then we had a ball called not koosh balls, what were they called? They were like tent material filled with foam pellets. And I did a lot of balls after that. That's why I can't remember the name of this one. But it takes a lot of balls to get into the business.
It certainly does.
But anyway, both items, they involved having TV, and I was working out of my living room. I put a suit on, walked down the living room. That's the last time I ever did that. The 2 products failed. And they failed because Toys R Us made a big order for me. And he bought both, and they were overstocked that year going into Christmas. And I had already made the goods and everything. And in July, or shortly before I was going to start shipping, they canceled my order. And I was basically going to be out of business. And that was the greatest challenge of my personal career, and I learned the most from it. So for 3 days, the only reason I hid in bed is that it was too uncomfortable when I was hiding under the bed. That's how down I was. Also getting divorced at the time. I was living in Cleveland and didn't know anybody. It was a very difficult time. And it's the only time in my life I actually got a therapist for a few months. In New York, everyone has a therapist, but back then. But after 3 days of this, something happened. I just got up, and I just decided, I'm going to see what I can do to fix this. And I started writing down what I had to do. Meanwhile, because of the company failed, my investors were all quitting. The bank quit. Toys R Us quit. And so it was really, I couldn't be more down, but I got up and I started writing down what to do. The first thing I had to do was go to Toys R Us and find a way to get them to make a deal for the inventory. And I went to New York, and I went with my salesman to see the buyer who canceled my order. I went to his boss, which is usually a no-no, but I had nothing to lose. His name was Van Butler, and I always remember his name because he really saved my business and really saved my whole career as an entrepreneur. But I told him, I said, we're a new company, and we had done this, and you're over inventoried, and you canceled my orders, and we're basically being put out of business. And he says, we need new toy companies more than we need you to go out of business. And he made a deal with me to take my inventory at a lower amount, but take my inventory at a fair price. And he basically kept us in business. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, I had already developed the next year's toy, because you have to do that a year in advance. And it was at a time when, if anyone remembers, you used to pay 50 cents to shoot baskets and see and keep score. And they had them in bars, and they had them in carnivals, and they had them all over, called Papa Shot. And so we had invented a home version of that called arcade basketball. And it was a net that would hang on a door. And it was a basket and a net that would hang on a door. It had a return net, and it would hook over the back of a chair that had little electronics on it. And you'd play the same game. And
Wow.
It came in a big box like our crawl space with a big printed label. and it became an instant hit. And so after saving the company, that second year we did $6 million and made $1.5 million, and we were in business. But I think the biggest thing I learned, besides the fact that eventually I had to get up and do something, was before that I've never had anything fail in life. I was a young guy and kind of cocky, and everything went my way. I got rid of that forever. There was a humility that came from it, that no matter how smart you do something, how well you do something, you still need luck on your side. You still need some breaks, because that doesn't always do it. So when I no longer would look at a product and say, oh, this is a winner, we're going to do it. I would analyze it. I know the weaknesses and the strength, and make a decision to go ahead. And I developed a very good track record, but we had products that didn't do as well. But over the next 9 years, we built the company to $140 million. We did, our most famous toys were Stretch Armstrong. I don't know if anybody had a Stretch Armstrong. And this Spin Pop, which was a lollipop you pressed and it would spin in your mouth.
Oh, yeah.
And we did license. And we had a lot of other hits, but those were the most well-known. We had a bubble gun that became one of the biggest bubble toys in the world. And eventually I sold the company partially to Russ Berry, a gift company, and then Russ and I sold it to Hasbro. And I basically worked for Hasbro for 6 months as president in charge of nothing. I don't know how I was such a specialist, but after 6 months, I didn't fit in. You know, as an entrepreneur, that's not necessarily, you don't necessarily fit in with the big companies and that type of lifestyle. So I settled with them, and I left, and I retired for maybe 1.5 years. I fortunately had enough money to retire. Then I was about 50, and I took up golf. And after 1.5 years, I got bad at golf. And when I got bad at golf, I needed to do something else. So I went to some of the designers in Cleveland, Nottingham Spurk, you know them, and another guy who I dealt with, and I had a list of 100 ideas that I wrote down. And I thought, well, as a group, we'll try to see if we can come up with a new product. And the very first idea, because of our spinning lollipop, we ruined so many kids' teeth that we decided to do a toothbrush. No, but because of the fact that we became experts, we sold millions of these spinning lollipops all over the world. And because of that, we became experts in small motors, batteries, and gears. So we were making spin pops for, I think it was 60 to 80 cents a piece. And we were buying, you know, in the hundreds of thousands of alkaline batteries. And actually for those, we probably didn't even use alkaline. You know, with the spin pop, we didn't really want it to be that strong. We didn't want the torque to be so strong. We were afraid of a kid's braces catching it and then twisting his head off. So we
Wow.
you know, you have to be thoughtful in business. But because of that, I said, you know, we were able to make this for 60 to 80 cents. If we could make a battery-operated toothbrush, a powered toothbrush operated by battery that we could sell at Walmart for under $5, that would be a home run. But the challenge was great. You know, could we make it do that? Now we had an advantage. The only electric toothbrushes were done by Braun and Oral-B and the $100 one. You probably use it. So none of them were nobody was looking to do what we were doing, because they didn't have the vision of this lollipop manufacturing, buying these things. They were all looking at the Braun $50 electric toothbrush and how could they design it down to $40. So we're sitting here saying, we want to make a toothbrush that's powered. And so I put together criteria that was very strict. Now everybody involved was reasonably well off, so nobody had to do it to make a living if we couldn't do it. But it had to come with alkaline batteries, and we wanted it to come with Eveready. Eveready was in Cleveland then too, and or it could have been the other one. But it had to come with good batteries. It had to have enough torque so that when you turn it on and it's moving, when you brush your teeth with it, it can't stop. It has to maintain that type of power. We also defined that it had to work for at least 3 months with the batteries. Because if you had to replace the batteries every month, I don't care if it's $5 to buy it, those batteries cost about $3.95 for 2 batteries or $4.95. It wouldn't be a good value. So it had to pass all of these things. And initially we made it round, and it spun. So we called it SpinBrush. It would spin, and it worked. The problem was after 2 weeks, it would be splayed and very ugly, and nobody would like it. So we sat back down and I said, why don't we make it oscillate? Instead of spinning so it splays, we made it oscillate. Then we still weren't sold on it because I didn't like the idea of people having to walk around their teeth. With that type of brush, you don't brush like you do a normal manual brush. We were trying to sell to the manual brush users. We didn't care about the $50 electric toothbrush. And with this round head, you have to learn a new way to brush your teeth. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be like a regular toothbrush. So I said, why don't we make it with this round head and make the bottom part fixed so it looks like a regular toothbrush you brush normally. And because of that, we probably can get a patent combining any form of moving bristles with fixed bristles. Nobody ever thought of that because there'd be no reason to until we did ours. So we ended up getting this amazing patent. And then we did one other thing that was quite ingenious. And I say it was ingenious not because it was my idea, but I came up with a lot of dumb ideas too. But when we were in the candy business, we had what was great. We put these 12 packs and we'd have a try me. You press the button and watch it work. And after we did lollipops that just spun, we did it with Bugs Bunny eating a carrot. We did it with Han Solo with a lightsaber. I'm doing all these. You press the button as a try me. So I said, why don't we make a try me with the toothbrush? And but if you turn the toothbrush on the shelf and leave it on, the battery would die. So we actually came up with a patent that we could press the button and make it work on the shelf, and it would go off when you let it go. But when you took it out of the package and pushed the button up, which you couldn't do when it was in the package, you can then stay on and work like a regular toothbrush. That was a very patentable feature that kept anybody else out of the try me if they wanted to get into that business. And this is what to me, this is what being an entrepreneur is. It's really finding a way. And when I speak at schools, I always say, they ask a whole lot of questions, and I say, I could answer every question you ask. It wouldn't be a very good, I wouldn't be a very good speaker, but I could answer every question you ask with just find a way. How do I raise money in this situation? How do I do this? And entrepreneurs, that's our job. We don't have, usually in most cases, we don't have a committee of people. We're often the last, the final voice and the one that has to solve it at night when we can't sleep. The one that has entrepreneurial terror when things go bad. And finding a way is what we're doing because we have no recipe for what we're doing. There's no menu. There's a lot of rules and things that I've wrote down, the 17 mistakes that entrepreneurs don't have to make. Very useful. I wrote it for myself before I did the SpinBrush because I thought, how could I make a perfect business? And so I wrote these down on backs of envelopes and stuff. It did eventually get printed in the Harvard business class and all these things, like some brilliant thing, but it wasn't. It was really just a bunch of thoughts I had to see if I could make a perfect business.
So right now you're at the SpinBrush.
Yes.
And is this was this the turning point of everything? I mean, see, that was like a very big invention with all these patents that are now, so you ended up selling that to Procter Gamble?
Yes, we did. But it was, again, we hoped to do $6 million our first year with $1.5 million profit. And I ended up hiring this guy, Joe O'Connor, and that's such a wonderful story how that happened, but we don't have time for it. We'll have another session. But we ended up doing $44 million with a $22 million profit.
Wow.
And we tried
That's
very
the first
hard.
year?
Our first year.
Wow.
But we did that on purpose. I mean, once we found out we had a huge hit, we tried to make it as profitable as possible because our target from the day one, when the idea was come up, was Procter Gamble. The reason being is that Oral-B had their Braun. Each company had some form of electric toothbrush. Reach, which was owned by I think it was Unilever. They tried a $10 vibrating toothbrush, didn't work. And P&G had slipped to number 2 in Crest. For the first time in 30 years, they slipped behind Total, and their Crest brand was really struggling. And their entire stock was struggling. So from day one, they were our target. But I don't want to go to a company and say, I want you to buy us. That's the best way to get a low price. So instead, we went to their licensing department to see if we could license the Crest name, and which we had no interest in really doing or thought they would ever do it. Well, I passed out toothbrushes to everybody in their office, and they all tried it, and they came back and said, well, we're willing to test it. So I sent them a few hundred, and they did consumer tests, and I didn't hear anything. And it went for 3 months. For 3 months, nothing. I finally figured if I call them, it's just going to lower anything. So I called him finally, and I said, well, we hadn't heard from you. Did you test it? He says, yeah, we thought you were going to call us. Anyway, it tested the highest test of any consumer product they ever had. It was the number one with consumers that ever tested. But they didn't tell me that. I didn't learn that until a few years later. But and then they said, we decided that we'll license it to you. Well, I don't want to license it. I mean, if I license it, I could never sell the company to anybody but them. And I said, God, I'm so honored. And let me take it back to the board and see, this is so great. And I come back to them and I said, God, our board, we're so honored that you guys would do it. But one of the things that we'd only be able to pay 3% royalty. Most of these are like 12% royalty for a major brand. And they said, yeah, we'll do 3%. And I finally said, well, the problem is our investors. Now, I was really me. You always claim, it's very important. If you're negotiating, if I'm going to teach anything as entrepreneurship, always have some other person, brain, or something that has to approve. You can always be the good guy and blame some imaginary board or whatever. But I said our board, I think we had a board actually, but our board said that they want to sell the company. Our investors and all this wanted to sell the company, and they felt that if they licensed the Crest name, they'd never be able to sell it except the Crest, and you'd have all. So they really can't do it, and we really appreciate it. And then he said, well, why don't we buy it? Oh, what a clever idea. Anyway, that is the way we did it. And I say this again.
And that was after how many years?
The whole company was 1.5 years.
Wow.
It literally, it was $1.5 million investment, and 1.5 years sold for $475 million.
Wow, wow. And that included all the patents?
That included everything. It could have my clothes. I don't care what that. But it became a great story. It eventually got written up by the Harvard Law School. Harvard Business School wrote the case of it, and it's their number one selling case in the history of the school. And every student who goes through there, even though they have 10,000 cases, it's the first case every student comes through has to take the SpinBrush case. But part of the reason is that he wrote it in such a way that I sounded like a street guy. He really emphasized I was a plumber and a carpenter and a cab driver and all ththese things, that it sounds like even a guy like this could make it, and you guys are all Harvard Business School.
That's
They
so
didn't
funny.
say my dad was a neurosurgeon and all this stuff, which was smart. But I also found out the guy who wrote it, who's a very close friend now, who was the head of entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School, was making a royalty on it and probably made $30 million over the years on royalties on the case. But anyway, so that's the end of that. After that, I did other products. One of the great joys that I had is that with two of my closest friends, we got involved with Broadway. We grew up together. I did consumer products. One did restaurants, Chi-Chi's, if you ever ate at a Chi-Chi's restaurant, and some other chains. And the other got into Broadway. And so we developed a Broadway show. Our first show was Big River, which is a Huckleberry Finn musical. And from there, we produced, we were co-producers, but we were producers. We weren't just an investment group. And we did Hairspray, Jersey Boys, the producers.
Wow.
And the most fun was the three of us did it together. We go to the Tonys, we go to the cast parties, And it was really a fun avocation that the three of us did together. Right before Trump was elected, the first time, 3 days before, my friend Ricky, who was the theater one, died suddenly.
Oh.
And I've just lost interest in doing it. I'm very involved in the theater in Florida, the Maltz Theater in Jupiter, used to be the Burt Reynolds Theater. And other than that, I teach, I'm an adjunct professor. I used to do several schools until I became a boat captain, and I'd end up with commitments when the weather was good, and I finally, I just continue to go to Harvard Business School every year. But that's basically it. But I have so much experience of so many businesses that I do have a lot to offer is for anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur, because I've really been through it all. And so I do I do some podcasts. I did one, I don't know if you know Guy Raz, How I Built This. So I did one, and you can look it up, it's in January, and that's another one I'm going to do. But at my age, I'm always looking to be relevant. And so I like the fact that I'm meeting with a group of entrepreneurs, and I didn't know what the group was. I was hoping it was entrepreneurs and not just friends that were coming over. But all of you have we all have the same thing. And when Wendy talked about me being the world's greatest supporter of women entrepreneurs, in a way it's not true. And the reason it's not true is I don't ever look at an entrepreneur as a man or a woman. To me, an entrepreneur is a personality. Now, men and women have had different opportunities over the years. It was tougher for women. It's gotten much, much better. And most of the women I know who've become successful entrepreneurs become far greater entrepreneurs than the men do. But so I don't look at it that way, but I think it's wonderful that you have a group that supports each other and that continues to grow these opportunities. So if there's any time, I would like to answer questions, which I could have done instead of telling you all this stuff.
No, it's all right.
Because that's
I
nice.
loved it.
All right. So,
You mentioned a lot of businesses and transitioning from one to the other. I'm wondering about your team. Did you always bring the smartest, the best employees from one business to the other with you, or did you have to find a new team every time?
well, that's so astute that you said that, because most of us, one of the mistakes we make in new businesses is we hire our cousin who sold shoes, and we heard he was good at sales, and we bring him in to sell real estate, and it doesn't work out. But with my most recent business, the toothbrush business, one of the things I had is I had filtered through the best of the best, the people who worked for me, and they all came along. So the team at that point was so good. We knew each other. We worked. We were like a machine. And but that's a good observation. Most people don't realize that. But it is hard in the beginning because it takes experience to really recognize who to hire. It's easy to make mistakes. The only thing is that when you do make the mistakes, correct them right away.
Immediately.
So, yeah.
When you were in your hippie days, were you on your own, or did your parents support you?
My parents always supported me for whatever I did. I was so small growing up that they, when I was in my hippie days, I was always making money doing something. Yeah, no, they didn't. My earring store, my mother invested $1,000. My father wouldn't invest. But what I did though is that the store worked right away, and I paid her back 2 weeks later. And I did that. She said, "You don't have to pay me." I did that because you maintain your credit. No matter who your investors are. Because I always took care of my investors first and made sure that if they made money, then I will make money. They were always there in line for my next business, and that's very important, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I have two very different questions. So if you could go back to your younger self and give your younger self one piece of advice that would have made your entrepreneur journey easier, what would it be?
Boy, I almost have to think, because
Deep question.
the reason I would think about it is that I don't think it being easier would have been a good thing.
Okay.
I think that everything that I went through, I can say that with every aspect of my life too, not just as an entrepreneur, but everything that I went to has been very important in defining how I do the business and how much better I get at it, and who I am as a person. So.
Yeah, and then you are so much more than an entrepreneur. You're an inventor. I mean, you're seeing opportunities everywhere. And I'm fresh off coming from a group of entrepreneur meeting, because there's lots of communities now for entrepreneurs to get together. And there was so much talk about trying to acquire a business instead of starting one from scratch. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that, because you literally are such a guy who got in there, saw opportunities and did it. What are your thoughts about acquiring versus starting from scratch?
Well, I'm very much in favor of acquiring, because I was able to sell my company to Procter Gamble and they acquired it. But my own personal, because I really have a skill and a lot of experience in starting a business, that's really more my thing than acquiring a business. At this point in my life, I actually do have a company I'm involved with, but I don't work anymore and I don't want to. And I like my grandkids and things like that. But most of these things, there's no rule about whether you acquire or start a company. Companies like Procter Gamble have gotten to a point where they find that they fail when they try to start a company, that they're better doing that. They're pretty good at expanding a line. They can make a new version of Tide or Pampers or whatever and have a new promotion, and they're very good at that. They're masters of distribution and manufacturing. But starting companies, they're not good at, so they acquire. And
the innovation they're lacking.
They can innovate within a brand, but they're not built for innovation. They're really built as a machine for products that they have such great distribution and systems, and they're built for taking product and putting them into that system.
Earlier in your career, when you were just maybe your little first baby companies, did you get to a point where you now had to bring in heads of different departments? Like that first time you ever had to do it, did you have some habits, or maybe personally? Okay, I realized I think I've trained my team, because I wasn't able to really have department heads, and now that I do, I'm like the answer machine. Like they really aren't making their own decisions, because everything goes through me. And I'm owning that. I think I've done this. I think I've trained them this way. But now I deeply desire, like, we can't scale if I'm the answer machine. Like people have to actually take ownership. But I haven't been able to hire the caliber of talent quite yet.
Right. It depends on what level your business is. When you're earlier on, for me, I would wear all the hats to start a business. Yeah. And in fact, I remember I used to unload trucks and stuff, mostly so that when we wrote the book about the business, I can say I started unloading trucks. But no, and then as it grew, I would be the sales guy, and and this and that. And as it grew, I would hire people that were better than me in those departments. But in the beginning, where they don't know the business, and you're in a growth mode, where the entrepreneur really is the king of the company and the decision maker, you have to, at that point, you do over manage, and it's required. As the company becomes more mature, that changes. But in a growth mode of a newer company and this and that, don't worry about having to do that. You do. There's no recipe or menu for how the people working for you to do it. Everything you're doing is new and building. They need you.
And when do you know you're at that point when you can let go? When
You'll know.
To hire that?
You'll know when you know.
You'll know when you know.
I sure have wisdom.
What was your formal education before you started?
What's the question?
What was your formal education?
Well, I kept changing majors because every time I had such a fear of public speaking. Oh my God, what am I doing? I had such a fear of public speaking that every time I had a major that I had to speak in front of the class, I'd switch. And I ended up in psychology because I didn't have to do that. I don't know why, but that was the case. I really was not, I didn't go to school with a lot of concept of learning. I went because that's what we did.
Did your education in psychology help you as an entrepreneur?
Probably not. It certainly doesn't help you get a job. You have to, if you're in psychology, you have to get a master's and maybe a PhD.
I don't mean as a job. I mean,
right. I probably learned something. I was talking earlier about education. When I paid for my own tuition at Wisconsin, playing with poker money, and it was because it was $500 a semester. But now that And for $500 a semester, it doesn't matter if I learn, if I get social value from going to school. But at $70,000 a year, that's too much for social value. You have to, you really need to be learning something or learning a skill now for that type of money. I'm not the biggest fan of college these days. So, got another one?
What were the most important mistakes you made?
Most important what?
Mistakes that helped shape your career.
Well, I probably made lots of mistakes, small mistakes. In the toy business, why did it fail the first year also was that I was selling products that required TV advertising when I had no experience in it. So I got myself really into a situation that really couldn't be successful at what I was trying to do. So it was kind of being naive and maybe a little headstrong, thinking because I had been successful in life up to that point that I can do anything. But I had lots of mistakes happen that I didn't necessarily make. Right before we did our biggest toy at Christmas one year, we had a Nolan Ryan Strike Zone baseball. And in July 4th it was, we had a problem where every once in a while the game would start over. You'd be playing in the middle, it'd start over. It was electronic. You actually pitched and it was a really cool game. So I sat on the couch on 4th of July playing every scenario, and I found the problem. And I found that it was a flaw in the chip. And we had to cancel our biggest product for Christmas that whole year. So that was a mistake. It wasn't necessarily anything that I personally did, but I can't look at it that way. I just don't think in those terms. I do think in the terms, though, that everything I did in the trades was valuable. I mean, I learned from learning how to work pumps and water pumps and these things. It's the same as an injection molding machine to make plastics. There's so many generalizations from things that I've learned, including mistakes. So I guess if I sat down, I could probably come up with some, but it wouldn't be that useful.
Woohoo! So I think to sum this up,
I guess we're done.
Wait, but I think to sum this up, which I thought was probably the most important thing you said, was find your way, figure it out. Because I think that's the truth in everything we do. There's a way if you have a will, there's a way.
Particularly as an entrepreneur, because you're doing something that's not been done. Many things we do that have been done that you can study and read books. But as an entrepreneur, you start it, you're the boss, you're the decision maker. And
I think today, more than
your way.
any other time in history, everybody needs those entrepreneurial skills because, there's no guarantee that you're going to work for a company for 40 years, right? And if you're not contributing to wherever you are, right, is going to be a detriment to anyone's career.
right. Well, I do want to thank you all for having